At the funeral of my father, a 4-star general, my stepmother blocked my path. "Your uniform is an embarrassment," she hissed. My own brother whispered, "Get out of here, you bastard." They thought they were burying his legacy. They had no idea they were about to be buried by it. I am Dakota James. I am 37 years old. And today, I was burying my father. The air in the old post chapel at Arlington was thick with more than just the scent of lilies and old polished wood. It was weighted with the history of fallen men. It was a heavy, sanctified silence that I knew well. My Army service uniform felt like a second skin. The dark blue jacket perfectly tailored, the row of medals on my chest a quiet, heavy catalog of my life. Each ribbon and star was a language few understood, a testament to a promise I had made at West Point: duty, honor, country. It was the only dialect my father, General Jonathan James, and I truly and fluently shared. But at the chapel's stone entrance, I was met not by a somber usher, but by my stepmother, Eleanor Vance. She stood poised, a gatekeeper to a ceremony she had orchestrated, not a grieving widow. Dressed in a black Oscar de la Renta sheath that cost more than a young private's annual salary, she surveyed me from head to toe. Her smile was a perfect, blood-red slash that didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes. "Dakota, darling," her voice was like honey, laced with arsenic, a soft weapon she wielded with expert precision. "I know you want to pay your respects, but this uniform?" She gestured vaguely at my chest, a flicker of genuine distaste in her expression. "It's so aggressive. It simply doesn't fit the solemn atmosphere here. It makes people uncomfortable." The words were a calculated strike. For a split second, I was back in the dust of Kandahar. The memory of grit and fear, a stark contrast to the perfumed air of the chapel. My uniform wasn't aggressive. It was a testament to survival, something she would never comprehend. She took the symbol of my life's work, of my bond with my father, and painted it as a vulgar, tasteless display. I kept my face a mask of military impassivity, a skill honed in places far harsher than a Washington, D.C. funeral. My jaw set, but I said nothing. Inside, her words echoed, uncomfortable, aggressive. Then my stepbrother, Preston, glided past with an effortless entitlement. At 30, he was the polished, coddled heir to the Vance dynasty, clad in a Tom Ford suit that screamed of inherited wealth, not earned respect. He leaned in close, invading my personal space, his breath a foul mix of expensive scotch and contempt. "Dad's gone," he whispered, the words a venomous hiss, meant only for me. "You have no reason to be here anymore. Take what's left of your dignity and get out of here, you bastard." Bastard. The word wasn't shouted. It was delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, designed to sever the last, frayed thread connecting me to this family. It was a brand seared onto me at my father's funeral. I was the daughter of the first wife, the inconvenient remnant of a life before Eleanor. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow, yet my training held me upright, my posture unbowed. My eyes remained fixed on the flag-draped casket at the front of the chapel. I was a major general. I would not flinch. As I took my seat in a back pew, isolated, the murmurs of the D.C. elite floated around me. I heard names of senators, lobbyists. I heard quiet talk of the luncheon that would follow, a private, exclusive affair at the Hay Adams Hotel, overlooking the White House, an event I hadn't been told about. Of course, I was a relic to be tolerated at the official ceremony, but I was not family, not for the parts that mattered to them. The service was a blur of platitudes from men who knew my father's rank, but not his character. When it was over, as the quiet shuffling of the powerful began, a voice cut through the air like a rifle shot. Major General on the floor, Atten Hut. It was Colonel Samuel Carrick, my father's oldest friend, his voice the familiar, gravelly bark of a lifelong soldier. It was not a request. It was a detonation of sound in the stuffy, polite silence. Instantly, the atmosphere split. Every man and woman in uniform, regardless of rank, snapped to attention. The sound was a sharp, unified crack of heels on stone, a sound of respect, a sound of loyalty. Even a few gray-haired politicians in civilian suits, men who had served decades ago, straightened their backs by reflex. They stood a silent, rigid wall of honor. Eleanor's perfectly sculpted face registered a brief, uncomprehending flicker. Preston looked merely annoyed. They were staring at a ritual from a tribe they would never belong to. Colonel Carrick walked directly to me, his face a roadmap of grief and resolve. He bypassed Eleanor and Preston without a glance. In his hand, he held a thick, cream-colored envelope. He pressed it into my gloved hand. It was heavy. I felt the fine linen paper, the sharp, intricate edges of the wax seal, pressing against my skin through the thin white glove. It was sealed with a dark red wax stamp bearing my father's signet ring. The general told me, Carrick's voice was low, for my ears only. He said, "If I ever go silent, Sam, give this to Dakota. She's the only one who knows how to make silence roar." I looked down at the envelope. My fingers tightened around it. My grief was a fog, but this was a compass. My rage was a fire, but this was a target. My humiliation was a wound, but this was a direct order. My mission had just begun. I sat in my sterile hotel room, the red wax-sealed envelope lying unopened on the nightstand. It was a beacon in the dim light, a final order waiting to be read. But my mind wasn't on the future. It was adrift in the past, charting a map of the scars that had led me to this moment. The sting of Preston's words, bastard, and Eleanor's casual cruelty had unlocked a Pandora's box of memories, each one a small, sharp stone in the foundation of my resilience. I remembered being 19, fresh out of a grueling training rotation, my muscles aching but my spirit high. It was Thanksgiving and I was on leave. All I could think about was coming home, to the scent of my father's sausage-stuffed turkey and his famous pumpkin pie. I craved the simple comfort of family, the feeling of belonging somewhere soft after months of hardship. I walked into our house in McLean, expecting the warm chaos of holiday preparations. Instead, I was met with a chilling silence. The air was cold, the kitchen dark. On the gleaming marble countertop, a note was propped up against a single sad box of Kraft macaroni and cheese. Eleanor's perfect looping script read, "Dakota, your father and I have an important dinner with the senator. You can find something in the fridge. Don't make a mess. Love." Love. The word was a mockery. At 19, I tried to rationalize it. It's an important dinner. She's busy. I ate the mac and cheese, the fluorescent orange powder, sticking to my teeth, and tried to ignore the hollow feeling in my chest. Looking back now with the cold clarity of a strategist, I see it for what it was. It wasn't just a forgotten dinner, it was a statement of worth. The senator was important, I was not. The contrast between their political feast and my cheap, processed meal was a deliberate message, a quiet, brutal lesson in my own insignificance. Another memory surfaced, sharper this time. It was Preston's 30th birthday. I was stationed in Germany, and I'd spent months scouring antique shops and flea markets in Heidelberg. I finally found it, a rare, beautifully preserved military map from World War II, detailing the Allied landing at Normandy. It was a piece of history, something I knew my father, a military scholar at heart, would cherish. I had it professionally framed and shipped it home, picturing his pride. Months later, on a short leave, I was looking for something in the storage room. And there it was, my gift. It was propped against a damp wall behind a stack of old magazines and broken tennis rackets. The glass on the frame was cracked. I found Eleanor arranging flowers in the living room. "The map I sent?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "For Dad?" She barely looked up from her peonies. "Oh, that thing?" she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Preston said it looked too old and gloomy for his new library. We need brighter things, you know." She smiled at me then, a tight, pitying smile. "Your tastes are so specific, dear." It was another masterclass in her particular brand of cruelty, making me feel that my love, my effort, my very essence, was somehow wrong. Uncouth, not fit for display, just like her stepdaughter. I even remembered one of her more public maneuvers. I was home on leave, and I heard my father on the phone with her, talking about a gala at the Chevy Chase Club, one of DC's most exclusive institutions. After he hung up, I saw the troubled look on his face. He later told me, "Eleanor, she thought you wouldn't be comfortable there, Dakota. Said it was all delicate people." At the time, I accepted it, believing my father was trying to protect me from a world us didn't belong to. Now I see Eleanor was isolating me, painting me as a social brute to ensure I was kept out of sight, out of mind. But the final damning piece of the puzzle clicked into place as I replayed my last video call with him. He had looked so tired, the shadows under his eyes like bruises. He'd leaned into the camera, his voice low and urgent. "Dakota," he began, "there are things here, monsters in dress uniform." Suddenly, Eleanor had swept into the frame, a whirlwind of perfume and dazzling smiles. She'd wrapped an arm around my father's shoulders, pulling him back. "Still talking about war, you two?" she'd chirped, her eyes bright and hard. "Come on, darling, our guests are arriving. Talk to you soon, Dakota." She'd kissed his cheek and ended the call. At the time, it felt like a simple interruption. Now I saw it for what it was, an act of control, a silencing. She hadn't just ended a call, she had cut off a warning. My father's distance, his silences, the pained looks I had mistaken for disapproval. It wasn't him pushing me away, it was him failing to protect me from her. He was a 4-star general who could command armies, but in his own home, he had been outmaneuvered. The monsters he was trying to warn me about weren't just in the Pentagon. One of them was sleeping in his bed. And now she and her son thought they had won. They thought the story ended with my father's silent death. They were wrong. The red wax seal on my father's envelope broke with a soft crack. Inside, there was no letter, no explanation. Just a single encrypted key card and a folded piece of paper with 2 words written in my father's sharp, familiar hand. "Find Caleb." The drive took me deep into the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, a world away from the starched formality of Washington, D.C. This was a place of winding roads, dense forests, and small communities where people went to disappear. The coordinates led me to a dirt track that seemed to dissolve into the woods. I parked my Jeep and continued on foot, the crunch of leaves under my boots the only sound. The cabin was almost invisible, tucked into a hollow and built from dark, weathered wood. But as I approached, I saw the subtle signs of a fortress, a nearly invisible wire fence, small motion-activated cameras mounted high on the trunks of ancient oaks. A satellite dish, a Starlink terminal, angled towards the sky, a modern nerve center hidden in the rustic shell. This was the home of a man who did not want to be found. As I crossed an unseen threshold, a metallic, synthesized voice echoed from the trees. "Private property, leave immediately." I stood my ground. The cabin's heavy, steel-reinforced door creaked open, and a man emerged. He looked like a cornered animal, thin and wiry, with a wild beard and haunted, burning eyes. In his hand, held with practiced ease, was a Sig Sauer pistol, aimed squarely at my chest. "I don't get visitors," he growled, his voice rough from disuse. I didn't reach for my own weapon. I simply held up the folded note so he could read the 2 words. His eyes narrowed, tracking the paper. He lowered the Sig Sauer, but only by an inch. The tension remained, a palpable thing in the cool mountain air. "Damn it, John," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "Always knew how to drag people into trouble, even from the grave." He jerked his head, a silent invitation to enter. Inside, the cabin was an explosion of organized chaos. The rustic exterior gave way to a digital command center. Banks of servers hummed softly, their blinking lights casting a green and amber glow on the rough-hewn walls. Wires snaked across the floor like vines, connecting monitors, hard drives, and strange custom-built devices. It smelled of ozone, stale coffee, and paranoia. This was Caleb Cal Rourke, formerly of the Defense Intelligence Agency. A ghost, my father's ghost. "He left you this," I said, holding out the key card. Cal took it without a word. He slid it into a terminal, and his demeanor transformed. The feral look in his eyes sharpened into one of intense focus. His long, thin fingers flew across the keyboard, a flurry of motion that was both frantic and precise. A black screen filled with cascading lines of green code. "They used a scorched earth algorithm on his files," Cal said, his eyes never leaving the monitor. "Wipe, overwrite 7 times, then fragment the remains across a dozen decoy servers. Amateurs." He said the last word with a ghost of a smile. For hours I watched him work. I was a general without an army, a strategist watching a new kind of war unfold on a digital battlefield. Cal explained his process in short, clipped sentences, as if briefing a superior. He said it was like reassembling a shattered Greek vase, but each shard was written in a different dead language, and the original image was a state secret. The low, constant hum of the servers was the only sound, a soundtrack to our descent into my father's hidden world. I made coffee, strong and black, the way soldiers do. It was all I could do, a small act of support in a war I didn't yet understand. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Cal froze. "Got one," he breathed. On the main screen, a single file log had materialized from the digital ether, Chimera Y Alpha log. It was a list of redacted names, coded shipments, and encrypted transfer authorizations. It was meaningless to me, but then my eyes caught one line that hadn't been fully redacted. A name clear as day. General Alistair Blackwood. My blood ran cold. The name hit me with the force of a physical memory. I saw him, a flash of a Christmas party at the Pentagon years ago. My father and Blackwood, standing side by side, champagne flutes in hand. They were both smiling for the camera, but even then, I'd noticed something strained in my father's smile, a tension around his eyes that the camera couldn't hide. Cal pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "A chimera," he said, his voice a low, awestruck whisper. "In mythology, it's a monster made from the parts of different animals. A lion, a goat, a snake. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a terrible understanding. This wasn't a project, Dakota. It's a conspiracy, and I think we just found the head of the beast. The discovery of Alistair Blackwood's name didn't bring relief. It brought a chilling, razor-sharp focus. The hunt was no longer an abstract search for monsters. It had a face, a rank, and a history intertwined with my own. Cal worked like a man possessed, sweat beading on his forehead, his entire world shrinking to the glowing screens in front of him. He explained that the Chimera log was just the container, a digital lockbox. The real data, the jewels, was hidden inside, fragmented and disguised with a level of paranoia I had to respect. "Your father was a paranoid genius," Cal muttered, his fingers a blur across the keyboard. He pointed to a seemingly random string of data that looked like digital static. "This isn't noise, it's a ghost." He used steganography, hiding encrypted audio files in the benign white noise of other recordings. The man turned the daily public weather reports into digital dead drops. A true Cold War spy in a digital age. I stood behind him, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, a useless general watching a one-man war. I felt a surge of professional helplessness, a feeling I despised. My entire career had been about action, command, and control. Here, my authority meant nothing. I could only watch and wait and make coffee. I brewed a fresh pot, black and strong enough to strip paint from a battleship, and placed a steaming mug beside his elbow. A small gesture of support, a soldier's gesture. Cal pushed deeper into the digital labyrinth, running a proprietary program he called Janus. He said it was an intelligence tool rumored to be mythical, designed to reconstruct damaged or hidden audio files. By analyzing residual harmonics, the echoes left behind in the silence. "It listens to the silence between the sounds," he explained, his eyes glued to the screen. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the changing slant of light through the cabin window and the diminishing level of coffee in the pot. Suddenly, Cal held up a hand, his body going still. "Contact!" He isolated a tiny fragment of audio, scrubbing it clean of the static it had been buried in. He looked at me, a silent question. I nodded. He hit play. The voice that filled the small cabin was cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was a voice accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed without question, a voice of absolute power. "He's a problem. Make sure he never gets the chance to testify before the committee." The air left my lungs in a single silent gasp. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order, an execution order. My suspicion, my grief, my rage, it all solidified into a terrible, undeniable certainty. Cal's fingers flew again, running a voice recognition program against a national security database he shouldn't have had access to. A few seconds later, a formal portrait appeared on the screen. The face was handsome, decorated, and smiling a predator's smile. The name beneath it confirmed my worst fear, General Alistair Blackwood. A green bar pulsed at the bottom of the image. Voice match probability, 99.7%. There was no doubt. It was him. A block of ice formed in my chest, heavy and suffocating. My father hadn't died of a heart attack. He had been eliminated. A 4-star general, a man who had dedicated 40 years of his life to his country, erased like a pawn on a chessboard because he had become a problem. The calculated coldness of it all was more horrifying than any act of battlefield violence I had ever witnessed. This was a betrayal from within. "Keep digging," I said, my voice a low growl I barely recognized as my own. Cal nodded, his face grim. He returned to his work, his focus now laced with a vengeful energy. More time passed. Then another audio file emerged. This one was different. The quality was better, clearer, as if recorded on a different device. Cal's eyes met mine before he hit play. My father's voice filled the room. It was deep, warm, and so painfully familiar, it felt like a hand squeezing my heart. But underneath the warmth was an urgency, a finality that made the hair on my arms stand up. Dakota, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it. Don't cry for me. I've lived a full life, but it also means you found the path. You were always the best soldier I ever knew. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to hold back the sudden hot burn of tears, but his voice continued, a testament from the grave. Don't trust the system. It's compromised. Trust your instincts. And don't you stop, daughter, not for anything, whatever the cost. There was a pause, a shaky intake of breath that betrayed the rock-solid composure of the general. It was the sound of a father, not an officer. Complete the mission. His voice cracked on the last two words, the sound of a father's infinite love breaking through a commander's final, desperate order. And then only the soft hum of the servers remained. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than any I had ever known. The ice in my chest shattered, and in its place, a white-hot rage ignited, burning away the grief. This was no longer just a message. It wasn't a whisper of conspiracy. It was a charge given to me by my commanding officer. It was a dying wish, handed to me by my father. He had known they were coming for him. And he had laid this trail, believing, knowing, that I would be the one to follow it to the end. That I would be the one to finish the fight he could not. My grief was a storm, but my new purpose was an anchor. My path was no longer hidden. It was illuminated by my father's final sacrifice. My father's final order, complete the mission, echoed in my mind. The mission now had two fronts, one against the shadowy conspiracy that killed him, and one against the family that was trying to erase him. To fight the first war, I needed resources. The kind of resources locked away inside the house I grew up in. I drove my Jeep back to the familiar, tree-lined streets of McLean, Virginia. The Vance mansion stood behind high, wrought-iron gates, a gleaming white fortress of new money and old grievances. It was a place of polished surfaces and hidden cruelties. I pressed the button on the intercom system, the small camera lens staring at me like a cold, unblinking eye. A moment later, Eleanor's voice, filtered and metallic, crackled through the speaker. "Who is it?" "It's me, Dakota." A long pause stretched, thick with disdain. "We have nothing to say to each other. This is private property. Please leave." I kept my voice calm, precise, the way you speak to a hostile negotiator. Under Virginia state law, as a direct descendant, I have the right to be informed about matters concerning the will. A dry, rasping laugh echoed from the speaker. It was a sound stripped of all warmth. "The will? Oh, you naive child! Your father left nothing for those who betray their family." Betray? My years of service. The life I had built on the principles he taught me. She twisted it all into an act of treason. Before I could respond, the main gate remained shut, but a smaller pedestrian gate clicked open. Preston emerged, and he wasn't alone. Beside him walked a man in a sleek, expensive suit, carrying a leather briefcase, the lawyer. This was a planned ambush. Preston sauntered towards the gate, a smug, triumphant smirk on his face. His Maserati Ghibli was parked in the circular driveway behind him, its polished grille gleaming like a predator's teeth. "Big sister," he began, his tone dripping with condescending pity. "Listen, let me make this very clear, so even your simple military mind can understand." He stopped just inside the gate, using it as a barrier, a physical representation of my exclusion. The lawyer stood silently behind him, a vulture in pinstripes. "Dad signed a new will 6 months ago," Preston announced, projecting his voice for maximum effect. "Everything, this house, the stocks, the trust funds, it all goes to Mother and me. Your name," he paused, savoring the moment, "isn't mentioned once. You're a deleted footnote, Dakota. An error that's been corrected." He held up a thick sheaf of papers, waving it like a trophy, giving me a clear view of my father's signature at the bottom of the page. A signature that looked tired, forced. A cold, hard fury began to build inside me, but I kept it locked down. Show no weakness. "I don't care about the money, Preston," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I want my father's personal effects, his medals, his journals from his office." Preston laughed, a loud, ugly sound. "Personal effects? You mean that junk in his old office? We had it all cleared out. Sold it to some collector. You know," he leaned forward conspiratorially, "to make more room for my new entertainment suite." The casual cruelty of it, the absolute desecration of my father's memory, was staggering. They hadn't just taken his money, they had sold his soul for a bigger television. I stared at him, at the empty space where a brother should have been, and felt nothing but contempt. He saw the look in my eyes, and his smirk tightened. He took a step closer to the bars of the gate, lowering his voice to a venomous whisper. "You were never really part of this, Dakota. You were just a mistake my father had to pay for, a relic from his first life, a ghost." He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on my uniform with disgust. "Now get out of here before I call security. Don't dirty my driveway. Don't dirty my driveway." That was it. The final indignity, the final severing. For years I had endured their slights, their exclusions, their quiet campaign of psychological warfare, all for the sake of my father. But my father was gone. The ceasefire was over. The rules of engagement had changed. They thought they had all the power, locked away in their fortress of wealth and paper. They thought I was a ghost. They were about to find out that ghosts can still haunt, and they can still go to war. I returned to Cal's cabin with a cold fire burning in my gut. The humiliation at my childhood home had cauterized my grief, leaving behind something hard, sharp, and brutally clear. I paced the floor of the cabin, the worn wooden planks groaning under my boots. A restless metronome counting down to war. I was a caged tiger, the bars of the cage forged from my family's greed and my enemy's arrogance. Every detail of the encounter replayed in my mind. The lawyer's smug silence, Preston's triumphant smirk, the final dismissive insult. "Don't dirty my driveway." They took my home. They're selling my father's legacy piece by piece, like it's junk at a garage sale. "They will pay," I said, the words low and final. Cal hunched over his terminals, looked up from the screen where the audio file of Blackwood's order was displayed, like a captured enemy standard. "We have the kill order," he said, his voice practical, pulling me back to the immediate threat. "It's the smoking gun. We can leak it to the press, the New York Times, the Washington Post. Let them run with it. It'll be front-page news." I stopped pacing and shook my head, a clear strategy forming from the chaos of my anger. No, that's too predictable. It's their game, on their turf. They'll issue a standard denial, they'll bury it under a mountain of no comments, and launch a multi-year internal investigation that quietly goes nowhere. Blackwood will weather the storm, The story will die in a week, and we'll have wasted our best weapon. I met Cal's gaze, my mind finally feeling like my own again. Clear, strategic, focused. I want to attack where they least expect it, not in the press, but in their own world. I want to use their arrogance against them. I pointed to the audio file on his monitor. Can you isolate a 10-second clip, just his voice saying, "Make sure he never gets the chance to testify." No context, no background noise, nothing else. A slow, wolfish grin spread across Cal's face. The haunted look in his eyes was replaced by the gleam of a predator who's just been handed a prime cut of meat. "General, I can make it sound like he's whispering it right in your ear from the depths of hell." He went to work, his fingers dancing across the keyboard. A few minutes later, he had it. A clean, disembodied 10-second clip of pure, incriminating venom. The next step was choosing the battlefield. Not a public square, but a private club. A place where the right people were listening. A place built on quiet credibility and inside knowledge. "The Sentinel's Perch," I said. Cal nodded in approval, a flicker of respect in his eyes. The Sentinel's Perch was a private, invitation-only online forum for active and retired military officers, intelligence analysts, and defense contractors. It was a digital VFW hall where secrets were currency and reputations were made or broken overnight. A whisper on the perch could become a roar in the Pentagon by morning. It was the perfect place to plant a seed of doubt. Using an anonymous, heavily encrypted account, Cal uploaded the 10-second audio file. He gave it a simple, provocative title. Anyone recognize this voice? No further comment, no explanation. We just dropped the stone into the pond and waited for the ripples, and we sat in the dim light of the cabin, the glow of the monitors illuminating our faces, watching the screen in a silence thick with anticipation. For the first few minutes, nothing. Then a single comment appeared. "Sounds like Blackwood." Another quickly followed. "No way, can't be. The quality is too clean." "Is this real? Source? Don't post this crap without a source." "The cadence is right. I've been in briefings with him for 20 years. That's him. I'd bet my pension on it." Within an hour, the thread had exploded. It had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. Retired Signals intelligence analysts were running the audio through their own spectrogram software, debating the waveform. Veterans were arguing about the precise inflection on the word committee. Journalists who lurked on the forum were sending private messages to the anonymous poster, desperate for the source. The pond had become a churning sea of speculation and suspicion. A cold, sharp satisfaction settled in my gut. I had thrown the first stone, and I had hit my target. The real victory, however, came the next day. The ripple had reached the shore and become a tidal wave. Blackwood panicked. Under pressure from his office, the Pentagon's official press arm released a formal statement. I read it aloud from a news site on Cal's monitor, my voice steady. "We are aware of a maliciously fabricated audio clip, created using advanced deepfake technology, that is being circulated online with the intent to defame General Alistair Blackwood's distinguished record of service." I looked at Cal, my brow furrowed. It seemed like a standard, effective denial. But Cal just threw his head back and laughed, a loud, genuine laugh that echoed in the small cabin. "The fools!" he crowed, pointing a triumphant finger at the screen. "The arrogant, predictable fools. They walked right into the kill box." "What mistake?" I asked, leaning in. His eyes were shining with intellectual victory. "They're so focused on denying the how, they forgot the what. They denied it was real, but they didn't deny it was him." They just confirmed the voice. By calling it a deepfake, they've admitted to the entire world that the voice on that tape belongs to Alistair Blackwood. He leaned back in his chair, a look of pure, unadulterated joy on his face. The battle has just begun, General, and we just won the first round without firing a single real shot. The satisfaction from our small victory was a flicker of light, swallowed instantly by the encroaching darkness. The beast had been poked, and now it was hunting. I met Colonel Carrick for coffee at a small cafe in Georgetown, a place with worn wooden floors and the rich, grounding smell of roasted beans. We spoke in low tones, him offering what little support he could from within the system, me feeling the walls closing in. He warned me that Blackwood was moving, calling in decades of favors, his influence reaching like toxic tendrils into every dark corner of the Pentagon. I left the cafe feeling a familiar knot of tactical dread tightening in my stomach. When I reached the public parking garage where I'd left my Jeep Grand Cherokee, I saw it immediately. All 4 tires were flat, slashed with a brutal efficiency that spoke of professional malice, not random vandalism. It was a message of intimidation. But that wasn't the worst part. Tucked under the windshield wiper was a black and white photograph, printed on cheap, high-gloss paper that felt slick and dirty to the touch. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was a picture of me and Cal inside his cabin, illuminated by the ghostly green glow of his monitors. It had been taken from outside through the window at night, a voyeuristic, chilling image that screamed a single terrifying message. We know where you are. We see everything. The cold dread on my skin was a sensation I knew from my time in hostile territories. The war was no longer online. It was here. I was being hunted. The next morning, the system struck back with its full crushing bureaucratic force. An official summons arrived via a stone-faced courier. I was to report to the Pentagon immediately. I was escorted not to an office, but to a small windowless conference room in the E-ring, a sterile box designed to make you feel insignificant. 2 colonels from the Inspector General's office sat across a polished table from me, their faces impassive masks. They were the system's inquisitors. They didn't ask about Blackwood. They didn't ask about Chimera. They didn't ask about my father. Their questions were a carefully constructed trap, a legal minefield. They accused me of violating national security protocols, of disseminating classified information, of conduct unbecoming an officer and detrimental to the good order and discipline of the United States Army. It was a textbook character assassination, a formal AR-15-6 investigation, designed not to find the truth, but to create an official one. Major General James, the senior colonel said, his voice flat and devoid of respect. You are hereby suspended from all duties indefinitely, pending the outcome of this investigation. As if on cue, the door opened and a uniformed military police officer entered. He was young, his face rigid with the discomfort of his duty. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I need to ask for your common access card." My CAC card, a simple piece of plastic, but it was my key to the world I had built. My access to bases, to systems, to my email, to my entire professional life. It was my identity as a soldier. I slid it out of my wallet and placed it on the table. The plastic clicked loudly in the silent room. It felt like they were peeling my skin off. As the MP took the card, I felt a profound sense of loss. Without it, I wasn't a general. I was just Dakota James, a civilian. I had been officially excommunicated by the very institution I had sworn to defend with my life. The final blow came that evening, As I sat in a cheap, anonymous motel room, the air smelling of stale smoke and disinfectant, a news alert popped up on my phone. My stepbrother, Preston, was a guest on a popular right-wing political podcast, his face beaming with sanctimonious concern. He spun a masterful tale of lies, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. He painted a picture of me as a mentally unstable woman, traumatized by years of combat, a jealous sister who could never measure up to his own success. "My sister is a tragic figure, really," Preston said into the microphone. "She can't accept that our father chose me to carry on his legacy. She's lashing out. These wild accusations, they're just the product of a troubled, hateful mind." The narrative spread like wildfire. The comments sections filled with vitriol, vindictive, crazy, ungrateful. The walls weren't just closing in, they had collapsed on top of me. I was buried, and as I sat there, alone in the buzzing silence of that cheap room, the glow of the phone illuminating my face, I have to ask, have you ever been there? Have you ever had your truth, the very core of who you are and what you've experienced, twisted into a weapon to be used against you, especially by your own family? Have you ever been told you're unstable, you're crazy, you're too emotional, simply for speaking a truth they don't want to hear? It's a specific kind of violence. They isolate you, they discredit you, they turn the world against you until you start to question your own sanity. That's their most powerful weapon, not the slashed tires, not the official papers. It's that insidious whisper they plant in your own mind. Maybe they're right. The buzzing silence of the cheap motel room in suburban Maryland was a tomb. I was buried alive under the weight of my family's lies and the Pentagon's betrayal. The doubt they had so carefully planted had begun to take root. Maybe they're right. The thought was a venomous whisper in the back of my mind. It was in this moment of absolute despair, staring at the cracked ceiling, that my burner phone vibrated against the worn bedspread. A restricted number. I almost ignored it, but some instinct, some flicker of a soldier's hope made me answer. "Hello?" A young man's voice, tight with anxiety, rushed out. "Major General James, I can't talk for long. My name isn't important. But my cousin was Lyra Soto." The name hit me like a jolt of electricity. Lyra Soto. A bright young captain who had worked in my father's office. The papers had reported her death a week ago. A single car accident on the George Washington Memorial Parkway. Brake failure, a tragedy. But I knew there were no accidents in this war. "Before she died," the young man's voice trembled, "she gave me something. She made me promise. She said, if anything happens to me, find Dakota James. Only she will know what to do." Hope, sharp and painful, pierced through the fog of my despair. "What did she give you?" "I can't say. We need to meet. Union Station, by the main clock. 1 hour, be alone." The line went dead. Union Station was a sea of controlled chaos, tourists, commuters, a river of anonymous faces. It was the perfect place for a ghost to meet a ghost. I stood by the main clock, feeling exposed and vulnerable. A young man in a hoodie, his face pale and drawn, walked past me without making eye contact. As he brushed by, he pressed something cold and metallic into my hand. A small red USB drive. He never broke his stride, melting back into the crowd before I could even whisper a word of thanks. Back in Cal's cabin, my only true sanctuary, I held the USB drive. It was an iron key, a military-grade encrypted device. Brute force attacks were useless. It would self-destruct after too many failed attempts. I slid it into Cal's laptop. A password prompt appeared. "What is it?" Cal asked, leaning over my shoulder. I tried everything I could think of. Lyra's birthday, my father's, his military ID number. Nothing. Access denied. Each failure felt like a door slamming shut. Wait, Cal said, his eyes sharp. Stop thinking like a computer. Think like a soldier. Lyra knew you. She trusted you. She would have chosen something only you would know. The foundation, the creed. I closed my eyes. I pictured West Point. I pictured my father's face on the day I graduated. I smelled the crisp autumn air, and I heard the words. I took a deep breath, and my fingers typed the password, one single unbroken word. Duty honor country. Access granted. A single video file appeared on the screen. I clicked it. The face of Captain Lyra Soto filled the monitor. She was beautiful, her dark eyes wide, with a fear she was trying to master. General James, she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor I could see in her hands. If you're watching this, it means I didn't make it. It means they got to me. Blackwood is cleaning house. She took a shaky breath. I was your father's aide. I saw what they were doing. I copied everything. The entire Chimera server. All the evidence is on this drive. Please, make my sacrifice mean something. The video ended. My hands were shaking. Cal put a steadying hand on my shoulder as I navigated to the other files. It was all there, a labyrinth of deceit, financial records detailing illegal arms transfers, coded orders moving high-tech weaponry to hostile powers. And then I found a folder labeled simply Testament. I opened it. It was a series of audio files recorded by my father. His voice was calm, measured, like a man reading his own last will and testament into the record. He laid out Blackwood's entire conspiracy, how he used Project Chimera as a personal slush fund to sell America's secrets to the highest bidder. He betrayed his oath, my father's recorded voice said, a tremor of pure, righteous anger finally breaking through his composure. He betrayed this country. I confronted him. He gave me a choice, silence or death. There was a long pause. I held my breath. I chose both, my father said, his voice now filled with a deep, aching love. A temporary silence and a death that would give my daughter the truth she needed to speak for me. I broke. A raw, ragged sob tore from my throat, and I slumped forward, my head in my hands. The tears I had held back for so long finally came, hot and bitter. He hadn't just been assassinated, he had engineered his own martyrdom. He had turned his own death into the final piece of evidence. A burning torch passed from his hand to mine. I cried for the father I had lost, for the hero they had killed, for the brave young woman who had died for this truth. Then I wiped my tears away. The fire of my grief had been forged into the cold, hard steel of purpose. I had the weapon. I had the truth. Now I had a war to win. The annual Army Birthday Ball, held in the cavernous main ballroom of the Walter E. Washington Convention Center, was the glittering heart of the military-industrial complex. Generals and politicians, lobbyists and defense contractors, everyone who was anyone was there, swimming in a sea of dress uniforms and evening gowns. This was my enemy's home turf. And tonight, I was going to burn it to the ground. I had traded my motel room existence for the crisp, immaculate lines of my Army service uniform. The deep blue jacket, the polished brass, the rows of medals. It was my armor. It was my authority. And I was taking it back. I wasn't suspended. I wasn't a pariah. Tonight, I was Major General Dakota James, and I was on a mission. When I walked through the grand entrance, a wave of whispers rippled through the room. Every head turned. I saw Eleanor and Preston standing near the head table, flanking a confident, smiling General Blackwood. Their faces froze. Eleanor's perfectly painted smile tightened into a grimace. Preston looked like he'd seen a ghost. They saw me not as a guest, but as a problem that had refused to stay buried. Eleanor leaned in, whispering urgently to Blackwood. He glanced at me, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, but then he simply shrugged, a small, dismissive gesture. His arrogance was his fatal flaw. He saw me as a disgraced, powerless officer, a fly to be swatted away. He thought my presence here was a pathetic, final act of defiance. He had no idea I wasn't here for the party. I was here for the hunt. The evening dragged on with forced pleasantries and self-congratulatory speeches. Finally, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. The master of ceremonies stepped up to the podium to begin a tribute to the legacy of my father, General Jonathan James. It was a river of sanitized platitudes, carefully curated to praise the legend while ignoring the man. The moment he finished his hollow speech, I moved. I walked onto the stage with a calm, deliberate purpose that commanded attention. The room fell silent. I took the microphone from the stunned MC's hand. "Forgive the interruption," I said, my voice ringing out, clear and steady, through the ballroom's powerful sound system. Every eye was locked on me. But there is a critical detail missing from that tribute. I let the silence hang for a beat, then turned my gaze directly on Blackwood's table. My father, General Jonathan James, did not die of natural causes. He died because he carried a truth that some of the most powerful people in this room wanted to bury. I saw Blackwood's smile falter. Eleanor went pale. He was murdered. A collective gasp swept through the audience. The silence that followed was absolute, a dead, heavy vacuum. In that silence, I pressed a small button on the remote in my hand. The massive screens behind the stage, which had been displaying the Army crest, flickered to life. And then a voice, Blackwood's voice, filled the ballroom, cold, precise, and unmistakable. "He's a problem. Make sure he never gets the chance to testify before the committee." The order for my father's execution echoed off the crystal chandeliers. The entire ballroom was frozen in stunned disbelief. At Blackwood's table, Eleanor's face was a mask of chalky white horror. Her champagne flute slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered on the polished floor, the sound like a gunshot in the silence. Preston, his face ashen, stumbled back from the table as if to run. I spoke again, my voice now like steel, cutting through the shock. The complete, unredacted evidence of Project Chimera, including files detailing treason and the conspiracy to commit murder, was delivered to the Department of Defense Inspector General and every major news outlet in this country exactly 5 minutes ago. As the words left my mouth, the main doors of the ballroom swung open. 4 uniformed military police officers, their faces grim and professional, their MP brassards gleaming under the lights, marched into the room. They didn't look left or right. Their movements were economical and direct. They marched straight to the head table, straight to General Alistair Blackwood. They said nothing. They didn't need to. The entire room watched, breathless, as Blackwood's face seemed to collapse. The arrogance, the power, the confidence, it all drained away, leaving behind a gray, hollowed-out old man. He rose slowly from his chair, his movements stiff. He offered no resistance as one of the MPs took his hands and secured them behind his back. With a pair of handcuffs, the click of the cuffs was the only sound in the vast room. They led him away, a fallen king being marched from his castle. The crowd parted before them, a silent, stunned sea of witnesses. My war was over. The game was finished. The storm I had unleashed upon Washington was swift and cleansing. In the weeks that followed, the pillars of a corrupt empire crumbled into dust. General Alistair Blackwood was convicted of treason and murder in a closed military tribunal and sentenced to life without parole at Fort Leavenworth. The James Family Foundation was frozen, its assets seized, revealing a web of shell corporations and offshore accounts. Preston faced a slew of federal fraud charges, his Maserati and Tom Ford suits traded for an orange jumpsuit, and Eleanor, she simply vanished. The Queen of Washington society abdicated her throne, retreating into a self-imposed exile of shame and obscurity. During the debriefings, the investigators revealed one final detail from my father's intricate plan. The Chimera backup server, the one Lyra Soto had copied, was protected by a two-factor authentication system of his own design. It required the physical CAC card of a general officer and a single, complex password. He had designed a lock that only I, his daughter, could possibly open. He hadn't just trusted me, he had made me the key. I was the failsafe, the sole guardian of his truth and his honor. My suspension was lifted, my record cleared with a formal apology from the Secretary of the Army himself. But I didn't feel triumphant, I just felt quiet. The fire of my rage had burned out, leaving behind the quiet, fertile ground of peace. A few months later, an invitation arrived. It was a request to be the keynote speaker for the graduating class at West Point, to return to the place where my journey had begun. Standing on the stage of Eisenhower Hall, looking out at the sea of gray-clad cadets, thousands of young, eager faces, so much like my own had once been, I felt the full circle of my life closing. The air was thick with history, with the ghosts of MacArthur, Eisenhower, and my father. I set aside my prepared notes. "They will teach you many things here," I began, my voice steady and clear. "They will teach you strategy. They will teach you logistics. They will teach you how to lead and how to follow orders." I paused, letting my eyes travel across the vast auditorium. But I am here today to talk about the one thing they cannot teach you, the one thing you must find within yourselves, and that is conscience. The hardest part of being a soldier is not following an order. It is knowing when not to. It is recognizing when an order, no matter how official, violates your oath, when it violates your honor, when it violates the very soul of this nation. Your duty is not just to the chain of command. Your ultimate duty is to the truth. When I finished, the hall erupted. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a standing ovation, a thunderous roar of respect that washed over me, healing wounds I didn't even know I still had. As the applause continued, Colonel Carrick, now retired, walked onto the stage. His steps were slower, but his back was just as straight. He didn't say a word. He simply held out a perfectly folded American flag. It was the flag that had draped my father's casket. The Army was officially returning it to me, not as a grieving daughter, but as his recognized heir. It was an apology. It was an act of restoration. It was peace. I accepted it. The tightly folded triangle of stars and stripes, feeling heavy and sacred in my hands. After the ceremony, as I was leaving the hall, a young female cadet approached me, her eyes shining with a fierce, nervous energy. She clutched a program in her hand. "Ma'am, General James," she stammered, her cheeks flushing. Could you sign this for my little sister? I want to show her that women can be lions too." I looked at this young woman, this future leader, and saw the reflection of a legacy I hadn't realized I was building. a legacy not of wealth or power, but of courage. I took the program from her. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, a genuine, unburdened smile reached my face. "It would be my honor," I said. As I signed my name, I knew I hadn't just reclaimed my father's legacy. I had forged my own. And in doing so, I had lit a path for a new generation of lions to follow. My story found its peace, but I know many of you are still in the middle of your own battles. You've been made to feel like the problem, the difficult one, the ghost in your own family's history. Please hear this. Your truth has value. Your experience is real. You are not alone in this fight. If my story resonated with you, please subscribe to Chosen Revenge. We share stories for those who have been silenced, to remind you of your strength, and to let you know that you are seen, you are heard, and you are believed.